I'm really kind of unsure if I should remind you of what took place when you and I had opportunity in the past to worship together. I'm not sure if you remember, but I will jog your memory because it comes under that context of, you ever have one of those days where things just didn't seem to always go the way you wanted them to? You know, the curling iron didn't work, the deodorant ran out. Maybe you just didn't have clean socks or underwear. Or the milk's gone sour, or everything in the morning just starts out. Then you start going to work and you find out that there's been an accident, of course, right in front of you practically, and you're stuck there. Nothing is going right. Well, I just remember that time that I thought I knew everything that was going on, especially here. And I came here to a 9 o'clock worship service at about 9:15. Just walking up that aisle over here, being told, Joe, it's time to start preaching. I've never been more embarrassed in my life, of course. But that's how I remember our time here. Hopefully there might be a few here who remember me coming in a little late that time, wondering if I was going to show up or not. I'm sure. You remember that, Kathy. Because they were dancing up here. One of those days. What happened? Why, we could all look at that and say, it wasn't my fault. Why did God do that to me? Or I could be like Job and take responsibility for what has taken place. Job, I've really, quite frankly, have probably never preached on Job. I try not to think too far ahead because we're only talking about the very beginning of this story of this man. This blameless, upright man, and God knows him. I mean, God knows him. I question if God knows me, but I know better than that. But I certainly don't consider myself as upright as Job. He is so well known to God that he's allowing Satan to test him. I have problems with this because I don't always think of God testing us. That is my theology, that God is there to support us. But we also know that days like those that we don't especially care for, we always consider, or at least we can think sometimes, that the devil is in our midst. That the devil has caused all this to happen. And I think it was Flip Wilson who said something alongside, the devil made me do it, or something along like that. But there is that presence in our lives of that thing called evil, the devil, Satan. We've been challenged in our lives, and we wonder where that comes from and how it is that we're going to be able to support. And sometimes we feel so challenged that we don't believe, maybe we find it challenging to know that God is really there with us. I mean, I would think that Job would have been just willing to listen to what his wife had to say. Believe it or not, I do listen to my wife once in a while too, but he did not agree with that. He did not let sin come from his mouth. What an upright man. What a good man. Sometimes we just feel so left alone. Sometimes. I'm not sure if you know or not, but I am a chaplain for one of our local hospices in our area. We live where our office is in Bolingbrook. Just a little sidelight. Bob Sheeler was one of our patients. And unfortunately, I was on vacation when he came on to our service and died before I came home. But just so you know, that's who I work for. And I've been with families. I've been with families who felt that they are living with some awful sores. Things that they can't believe are happening to them or their family or their loved one. Their faith has been challenged. Sometimes they feel so alone, they don't know where to turn. It's out of control. God's voice seems to be muted. They can't find the mute button to turn it back on. It's a very challenging life when you start talking to someone and trying to encourage them to recognize the fact that their loved one is going to find peace. They're going to find comfort. They're going to find new life in Christ in this place that we call heaven. And they look at you and they say, "Really?" I think of this Job and how well and how much integrity he had to know that he was being so challenged and yet did not deny, did not have any issue. But we all are human still, and our humanity tells us at times that we don't always get it. And then we start thinking about all the things that are happening to me and not realizing that what is happening to me is actually not just me. That it's about how it is that I am to relate to my God. One of the things that really took a very challenging time, again, in my role as a hospice chaplain, and it has to do with just, where is God in all of this? It was when I was sitting home during the pandemic. Sitting home, making phone calls, talking to families, hearing the stories. My loved one can't see me. I can't get in the facility. I can't get in there. All I can do is have the blessing, if it is such, of FaceTime, maybe Zoom. But they don't get the touch. They don't get the presence. It was horrific. And then to be told, because I couldn't go in, that my role in the hospice, at least in my mind, felt like I was not essential. And when you hear that word, that you aren't essential, you really feel the ashes and the sores coming on. Because there you do, as you sit and you're wondering, well, God, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? What is it that I have to do to be able to be put in that position again where I can be with families and walk this journey of life into heaven? I cannot tell you the number of times that it's everybody. It was everybody I talked to on the phone said, I just wish I could see Mom or Dad. I just wish I could see my loved one. Window visits, they helped, but they couldn't touch. You could see the smiles, you could see the tears. You can watch the mouths saying, I love you. Dark, dark time as we've experienced. I'm not telling you anything you have not experienced, but it was hard. Then came the day that we got the word that some facilities were allowing the entire team to walk into them. And you walk in, and you see the changes. Tragic, traumatic differences than when you saw them and it turned out to be almost a year, maybe a year and a half later. And to see how much of a decline. And some of these folks weren't even in our hospice, but you could still see how this isolation, how it deteriorated everybody. And I know you've seen it too. But there's been that uncertainty that filled their eyes. The light was just flickering in the eyes, not bright and shiny. Difficult days, difficult time. In our living little community of which we live in, my wife and I, we live in a over 55 gated community. I started seeing all these things during COVID about all the countries, and people were standing on their balconies and singing and checking on each other and all kinds of stuff that was going on just to be creative, to let people know that they were alive. Well, I did the American thing. I decided we would start a cocktail hour. And the cocktail hour was at 4 o'clock every day, and we would stand or sit with a beverage of choice in their driveway. The purpose was to let each other know we're still there. We were there. We were there for each other. Waving, hi, whatever. Eventually it started coming closer together, still from 80 feet away to 10 feet away to the 6 foot. And I had my next door neighbor tell me she doesn't know how she could have made it through COVID if we didn't have this cocktail hour. And we're still doing it to this day. It has brought a community together. We find it very hard to recognize the fact that we do need each other, and that's why you're here today. We need to be together in this time of worship. We need to recognize the fact that we are not left alone. I mean, that is a knowledge that I believe Job understood completely. That even though he knew he was being challenged beyond all ways, and we'll hear more of the stories as time goes on during this little period of time that your church is challenged by this story, that through it all, we can find ourselves, quite frankly, being challenged by, as we want to call, the devil, that God is not there. That God is just not there. Look what happens. You get sores. You get lost in the whole rubric of life. And you think, I want to hear God. And then you don't. And then you say, I want to feel God's presence. And you don't. You try like crazy. What are your reminders? What is it that reminds you that you are not alone in this thing called faith? Coming to worship, maybe? Being in some sort of your groups that you have here? The ministries that go on here? Maybe it's just reaching out to that stranger. Maybe it's your neighbor. These are reminders. These are reminders that we are not ever been left alone in all of this. It's a challenge, definitely, that we've never really understood sometimes how it is that we need to really think about this. Because, we've watched the movie Home Alone. But are we really ever left alone? Jim? Time. I'm waiting now. I'm just pausing for a minute here. You're saying what? For the kids to come up. Well, We've all experienced things where we felt that God has left us to our own way to be. On a personal level, I am just so fortunate that I have experienced God in so many ways, especially during my hospice ministry, of seeing how God does take good care of us. And I am just so thrilled to have had this opportunity today to preach, to be here, to be part of this time together. Any questions? We'll take questions. Okay. Seeing none. I'm not good at extending things. I could dance, but no. Back's not handling it. Certainly.
The government did deem hospice essential in terms of non-medical.
Yes.
I'm surprised.
Pardon me?
I'm surprised.
Facilities wouldn't let us in. Facilities made the wrong answer on my part. They allowed the nurse in. The only one. They would not allow health aides. They would not let the social worker, and they would not allow the chaplain. And that was called hospice. But as the law says, and the program comes to us from Social Security, Medicare, it's a team effort and not just one person. And I mean, I'm part of a podcast. I do a podcast with one of my colleagues. And during the beginning of all this, we had many throughout our country and in the world that didn't know what to do because they weren't allowed to do the work that they've been called to do. And you felt so impotent because you can't do it. It's different now, and I've also taken a different attitude, which is yet to get me in trouble, where I do walk in until they tell me I have to leave. And I know that there are families and that there are situations where, quite frankly, we have more issues with spiritual pain than physical pain. And that's the thing that I find that we have to be very, very aware of and be certain of. So I thank you for your question. I appreciate that. And I understand we're about ready to get started for our Worldwide Communion Sunday. And remember that we celebrate this with our brothers and sisters throughout the world. Truly a joyous celebration. Amen.